There's a certain kind of man who walks into a Bentley dealership and doesn't say much. He doesn't need to. He's already made every decision that matters. He's not there to be sold something. He's there to confirm something. And that distinction, that subtle, almost invisible distinction, is the beginning of everything you need to understand about the psychology of Bentley ownership. Most people think buying a luxury car is about showing the world you've made it, and for many brands, that's exactly what's happening. But Bentley is different. And the reason it's different will tell you something profound, not just about the men who drive them, but about what success actually does to a person over time. Let's start where every great story starts, at the beginning. In 1919, W.O. Bentley didn't set out to build the world's most expensive car. He set out to build the world's best car. There's a meaningful difference there. His obsession wasn't luxury in the decorative sense. It wasn't velvet and gold leaf in the theater of wealth. It was performance, durability, mechanical excellence pushed to its absolute limit. The early Bentley cars were racing machines that happened to be road legal. They were brutal, effective, and engineered with a kind of religious devotion to doing things properly. Then came Le Mans. Between 1924 and 1930, Bentley won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 5 times. 5. In one of the most grueling endurance races ever devised, where cars and drivers are pushed past every reasonable limit for an entire day and night, Bentley didn't just compete, it dominated. And the men who drove those cars, the Bentley boys, as they came to be known, were not professional racing drivers in the modern sense. They were wealthy gentlemen, adventurers, men who raced because they wanted to, not because they had to. There was something aristocratic in that, something that said power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply performs. That ethos never left the brand. Even as Bentley evolved through the decades, through ownership changes and market shifts and the quiet pressure to become something more commercial, the soul of what W.O. built remained. The philosophy of the Grand Tourer, the idea that a car should be capable of extraordinary things while making you feel completely at ease. Speed and serenity existing in the same space. That's not a technical achievement, that's a philosophical one. Now, here's where it gets psychologically interesting. When you study how people form identity, and this is one of the central questions in social psychology, you find that we don't just have one self. We have layers. There's who we are in public, who we are in private, who we were, and perhaps most powerfully, who we believe we have become. The objects we surround ourselves with, especially the expensive and deliberate ones, often serve as what psychologists call identity anchors. They're not decorations. They're declarations, silent ones, but declarations nonetheless. Most luxury car buyers are still in the phase of becoming. They're reaching. Ferrari says, "I am fast." Lamborghini says, "I am bold enough not to care what you think," even though the choice of that car proves otherwise. These are powerful signals. They're designed to be seen, designed to create a reaction. And for a certain stage of success, that reaction is the point. You want confirmation from the world that you've arrived. But something shifts in certain men. After enough confirmation, after enough proof, after the business has grown and the deals have closed and the scorecard has been updated enough times, there comes a moment where external validation starts to feel less necessary. Not because the man has become humble in the passive sense, but because he has become settled. His identity is no longer a question he's trying to answer with a car. It's already answered. And what he wants now is not a signal to others. It's a reflection of himself. This is where Bentley lives. Right there, in that psychological space. There's a concept in economic theory and evolutionary psychology called costly signaling. The idea is that the most credible signals are the ones that are expensive and hard to fake. A peacock's tail isn't just beautiful. It's biologically expensive to grow and maintain, which means only genuinely healthy birds can carry it. The tail signals health precisely because it's a burden. In human status signaling, the same principle applies, but there's a more sophisticated layer that often gets overlooked. The most powerful signals are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes restraint itself becomes the signal. When a man drives a Rolls-Royce, the signal is ceremonial. It says, "I have arrived and I want the world to witness it." There's nothing wrong with that. It's honest. But when a man drives a Bentley, the signal is more internal. It says, I know what this is, and the right people know what this is, and that's enough. The Bentley driver is not performing for the crowd. He's performing for a much smaller, more selective audience, and in many cases, that audience is himself. Psychologists who study intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation will tell you that the most durable forms of satisfaction come from within. When you pursue something for external reward, the satisfaction is real, but it's temporary. It depends on the world responding the way you need it to. But when you pursue something because it aligns with who you genuinely are, the satisfaction doesn't require an audience. It's self-sustaining. Bentley ownership, at its psychological core, tends to sit closer to the intrinsic end of that spectrum. Not always, not for every owner. But the brand's cultural identity attracts a particular kind of man more than others. One who has moved past the need to announce himself. One who appreciates craftsmanship not as a status prop, but as a genuine value. One who understands that the hand-stitched leather and the knurled metal controls and the 14 coats of paint are not excess, they're precision. They're the physical expression of doing something completely right. And that resonates with a man who has spent decades trying to do things completely right. There's another layer worth examining: the concept of identity congruence, which is simply the degree to which your outer life matches your inner self-concept. When those two things align, when how you live reflects who you genuinely believe yourself to be, there's a psychological ease that's hard to describe but impossible to miss. You see it in how certain men carry themselves. Not arrogance, not performance, just a kind of settled clarity. Many Bentley owners describe the car not in terms of what it does for their image, but in terms of how it feels to sit inside one, the way it moves, the quiet at highway speed. The sense that everything around you has been considered and resolved. They're describing an experience that mirrors how they want to feel in their own life. Capable, composed, in complete control without any effort visible from the outside. That's not a coincidence. We choose objects that reflect the internal experience we most want to inhabit. Compare this for a moment to the psychology of Lamborghini ownership, and do so without judgment because both paths are human and both are valid. The Lamborghini buyer is often in a phase of assertion. The car is aggressive in its geometry, theatrical in its sound, designed to rupture attention wherever it appears. That's its function. Not as a failure of taste, but as an honest expression of a psychological need, the need to break through, to be undeniable, to force the world to acknowledge something. At a certain stage of building yourself, that energy is real and appropriate. The Lamborghini is the physical form of that energy. Bentley is what sometimes comes after. Not always, not for everyone, but for the men who arrive there, it tends to feel less like a purchase and more like a recognition. Here is perhaps the most quietly powerful thing about Bentley's position in the psychology of luxury. It doesn't need to compete. A Bentley doesn't try to be the fastest car on the road. It doesn't try to be the most visible, the most aggressive, the most polarizing. It occupies its own space with a kind of sovereign indifference to comparison. And that quality, that absolute lack of anxiety about its own identity, is precisely what attracts the men it attracts. There's a psychological term called secure attachment. In its original context, it describes how children relate to caregivers, but the principles extend broadly into adult psychology and identity. A securely attached person doesn't need constant reassurance. They don't act out for attention. They engage with the world from a place of internal stability. The anxiety that drives so much human behavior simply has less grip on them. Bentley, as a brand, has the psychological profile of a securely attached entity, and the men it draws in most deeply tend to share that quality. They've done the work, they've built the thing. They've proven it to themselves, and now what they want is not more proof. What they want is an environment that matches the internal state they've worked so long to achieve. Consider what goes into building a Bentley. Craftsmen in Crewe, England, spending hours on a single interior panel, hides selected for grain consistency. Wood veneers matched so precisely that the pattern continues unbroken from one door to the next. These are not the choices of a brand trying to impress. These are the choices of people who simply cannot do it any other way, who have a standard and refuse to lower it regardless of whether anyone notices. That's a value system. And men who have built businesses and careers on that same principle, the refusal to lower the standard, even when no one would notice, recognize it immediately. It feels like meeting someone who speaks the same language. There's a reason that when you study where Bentley ownership concentrates, you find it disproportionately among men who built something rather than inherited something. Entrepreneurs who started with nothing and built empires. Executives who rose through merit over decades. Self-made men in the most literal sense, not exclusively, but disproportionately. Because Bentley's story is also the story of building something remarkable through discipline, craft, and an uncompromising relationship with quality. And that story resonates most deeply with the men who recognize it from the inside. Abraham Maslow famously described human motivation as a hierarchy. At the base, survival, then safety, then belonging, then esteem, and at the peak, something he called self-actualization. The point at which a person is no longer primarily motivated by what others think or what the world will give them, but by the fullest possible expression of who they are. Most people spend their entire lives somewhere in the middle of that hierarchy. The men most drawn to Bentley tend to be operating closer to the top, not because they are better people, but because they have resolved enough of the lower levels to start asking a different kind of question. Not what do I need to prove, but what do I actually want to be? The Bentley is the answer many of them eventually arrive at. Not because it's the most powerful car, not because it's the most recognized, but because it is, in the deepest sense, congruent with who they are, with what they've built, with the version of themselves that required the most discipline and the most sacrifice and the most quiet determination to become. They don't drive a Bentley because they want to be seen. They drive it because, finally, they are completely at ease with being exactly who they are. The car doesn't make them significant. Their significance made the car make sense. They don't drive a Bentley to arrive faster. They drive it to arrive as the man they've become.